Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker, retired, and proud of it. Today for me, it's December 16th, and it's a Friday. I'm not going to be doing another show until late in January. So I usually say everything I say will be obsolete, but in this case, it'll be more obsolete than ever. Why? Because by the time my next show happens, and you'll be watching this show any one of 4 or 5 weeks, the Iowa primary will be over, the Iowa caucus rather, not primary. I could be criticized for not knowing that, but I do know that. And Newt Gingrich, who I've been has taken over as the front runner, might win, might not. For all we know, Ron Paul could win, or Romney could turn around, although that doesn't look likely right now. So that's a very, very big event. The other big event that's going on this week, and as I speak now, as opposed to the future now, where you will see me, is that Congress is meeting before its winter Christmas recess, Christmas New Year recess, and there's a lot of things at stake. So they have to either do a continuing resolution or they have to resolve the budget, which is on a continuing resolution right now, or the government will shut down. Well, they pretty much assured us that the government is not going to shut down, so they'll be doing a vote today or tomorrow, today for me, but way in the past for you. Also, the big issue the last couple of weeks has been the payroll tax exemption or extension. Basically, a year ago, Obama pushed a payroll tax reduction of 2%, which basically puts $1,000 into the pocket of working Americans who make $104,000 or less. And as a result, supposedly they had more money to spend, and the economy was supposed to have improved. Well, the economy did improve. Whether it was because of that or not is hard to say. A year ago, we were at over 10%, 10.2 1 month, and 10.4, I think it was the max. And now, at least the posted unemployment rate is 8.6. It was down almost 2 points. So approximately 1.5 million jobs have been created, a lot more in the private sector, but in the public sector, for school districts, cities, towns, states, which have had to balance their budget in a terrible recession with declining tax revenue, basically cutting and slashing their budgets and laying a lot of people off, putting people on furlough and so on and so forth. So there's been tremendous cuts in public employees. And some of those public employees, while they may not be popular with Tea Party types, firemen, policemen, teachers, are very popular with the rest of the public, garbage men, sewer workers, and so on and so forth, because they supply absolutely vital services. Now, I personally affected by this because my neighborhood, which was there'd be a monsoon. A few days later, a team would come out from the county and they'd fix the potholes. I couldn't believe the potholes that have occurred in these winter rains that we've been having here in Arizona. I'm going to show Arizona over here. We've had some great rains. In fact, we're ahead of our normal rainfall. And my entire neighborhood has tiny little potholes all over the streets. And according to the local news, they either can't be fixed or they won't be fixed because the temperature is below 50 degrees in some places. And that's not good for the asphalt to be able to set. Well, in the past, we've had no problems with that. Yes, every single year during the summer monsoon season, during the winter rainy season, potholes have appeared. It's just part of the idea of having lots and lots of water, plus the weight of cars and trucks, go over asphalt that's basically just poured onto dirt without any underpinning at all. The really good streets have concrete or macadam or gravel. Underneath, ours have nothing but dirt. So the minute it gets wet, the rain pours between little micro cracks in the concrete. A big, giant, heavy truck goes over it, and then boom, there's a slight hole. A couple more trucks go over it, and there's potholes. So we've had, in my neighborhood, and for me personally, a tremendous decrease in our lifestyle. So there's a book that's out that basically says the third worldization of America. Well, I don't know about America, but my neighborhood, which is county area near Marana, has had a third worldization. What could be more third world than driving down streets with potholes and avoiding giant potholes? Now, in one street, major north and south, well, not major, but intermediate north and south street that shall remain nameless, ended up with a big giant pothole about 3 feet wide and 1.5 feet deep that would probably break your axle if you fell into it. Nobody did, but as you were driving down the street, you were driving into cars that were trying to get around this pothole, and that had developed over a few weeks. I noticed just today that obviously somebody in the county has ignored this little rule about the 50 degrees because it was cold and came out and fixed that particular pothole. But the rest of the potholes, in other words, the rule must be if a pothole is dangerous to life and there's going to be an accident that's going to kill somebody, we might think about coming out and fixing it. So this recession, which is an abstract thing to some people, absolutely real to people who've been laid off or unemployed. That's, the old saying from the first depression was a recession is when somebody gets laid off, and a depression is when you get laid off. And a Great Depression is when you get laid off and somebody takes your house in a foreclosure. Well, all of that is happening to a lot of people. And things are getting better. They're getting better very, very slowly. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate is actually dropping. And if it drops a little more, it'll be at the point where Obama can say, because the rate had already gone from 5 to 8.5, because it takes a couple months before you get inaugurated. So it has to fall below 8.5 for him to say, I brought it back down to where it was when I got here. So what about this unemployment rate? Why is it getting better? Well, some of it's getting better because they are actually hiring more people. And that's happening. But for every 3 people they hire, 1 person gets laid off. So the hiring is not consistent. So in local and state government, people are still being laid off. In fact, they're being laid off in higher numbers because those are the people whose jobs were saved because of the stimulus funding. So right after Obama took over, he spent $800 billion in stimulus. Well, the stimulus, there wasn't very much stimulus in there. There were some tax cuts, but 400 of the 800 billion was basically to bail out cities and states, school districts, sewer districts, to keep the infrastructure running during a period when the tax base had collapsed for cities and states, and on top of that, and towns and municipalities, but even more so, the method of financing them, the method of of giving them bonds, which are basically loans, that had also collapsed because they had what they called auction-rated securities, and that system had completely collapsed. So the bonds for state and local governments were guaranteed by the federal government and I believe the Federal Reserve, so that the system didn't collapse in on itself completely. But the stimulus funding basically pumped $400 billion into cities, towns, school districts, community colleges, and so on and so forth. And that is over at the end of the year. So and the budgets for these various things are already showing the cuts that are necessary. Now, there has been a slight increase in tax receipts. There's also been higher taxes levied at the local level, which has offset some of the Bush tax cuts at the federal level. So taxes are going up for individuals, but they're going up at the state and local level because basically our system had almost collapsed. So basically, we are having a recovery in private industry, not a very fast recovery, but we're having a new disaster in the local state education system at the local level. Now, what's happening at the federal level? Well, the federal level, they're fighting it over whether to have $1.2 trillion worth of cuts. About a month ago, they had a super committee, and the super committee failed. The failure of the super committee was supposed to have led to $1.2 trillion over 10 years, $120 billion a year. Not nothing, but wouldn't solve the deficit over a period, each year for over a period of 10 years, and or else automatic cuts would come in. But the catch was the automatic cuts come in 2013. So everybody gets to put it all off for an entire year and a half, which was, of course, good for the congressman. They could say, I was tough, but it didn't quite work out. Meanwhile, if Congress did nothing. Now, I got a couple articles about what would happen if Congress does nothing, except pass, let's say, a continuing resolution to keep the government open. Well, if that happened, we'd have a great situation if you're a deficit hawk, and I kind of am, although I don't want to sacrifice our economy to do it. Basically, right now, we only collect approximately 15% of GDP in taxes, whereas at one time we had collected 20.9 during the end of the Clinton administration when we had, ironically, a balanced budget. Well, what happened? What happened was the Bush tax cuts. Now, I've been trying to find out what exactly were the Bush tax cuts that had this big impact. Part of it was taking the top tax rate and lowering it from 39.6 to, I believe, 35. It also restructured the tax rates. It took each rate and lowered it, and also took the level at which they kick in and made them higher. So the result was a drastic reduction in tax receipts. However, the biggest reduction was not in income tax. The biggest reduction was in corporate tax. And the funny thing is, what they did is they rewrote the rules for corporate tax. They lowered the level a little bit, down to 35%. From what had been a higher level. But that's not what made the big impact. What made the big impact was basically they said to importers, they said to multinationals, you do not have to pay taxes twice. If you import something from China and you pay your Chinese tax, you don't have to pay taxes in America. Companies immediately took advantage of that. And if they bought a part for $1 that was worth $100 or $105 with a 5% profit in the United States, they'd sell it to themselves somewhere in the middle for $99, and they declare that they only made $1 profit off of that part. Well, what was the result? The result was a collapse of corporate tax receipts. So corporate taxes have collapsed from $430 billion a year down to $130. So $300 billion a year, every year, $3 trillion a decade, gone. And there's no doubt about it. If Congress did nothing, the Bush tax cuts would go away. And if the Bush tax cuts go away, then $300 billion a year of tax receipts go up. And it's probably between 300 and 500. And there's another thing that happens. The doctors and the hospitals for Medicare and the elderly, of which I am one, AARP and so on and so forth. The doctors have been complaining that Medicare doesn't pay them enough. And of course, a lot of those doctors are one percenters because they have among the highest salaries in the entire nation. I'm talking about pay, wages, salaries. So a lot of those people who make that $1 million a year are doctors. So what about them? Well, they said, well, Medicare is not paying us enough, and we're going to have to drop out of the Medicare system and not take care of elderly people. So, we'll give very wealthy people Botox shots, and we'll stop taking care of the elderly and their needs. So you have to pay us more. So they have a SGR. I'm not sure exactly what it stands for. Which is, let's see if I can find the word for it. I don't think I can. But anyway, it's an adjustment for doctors and hospitals to raise the amount that Medicare pays them, so to persuade them to stay in the Medicare system. Now, I have to admit, a lot of those doctors would stay into Medicare and Medicaid, and why would they? Because there is no customers for their specialties. If you're in cancer, the person who's in front of you is probably Medicare. If you won't treat Medicare for slightly less or even a lot less, you're not going to get customers enough. You're going to have to double the charges to the wealthy people that walk in front of you. And if those wealthy people are over 65, they're on Medicare too. Basically, the threat is that our system will fall apart. Hospitals and doctors will go on strike. They won't treat the elderly unless they get this tremendous payment. Well, that special payment runs out on the 31st of December. What are the odds that they're going to re-up it or even increase it? Well, very big, because even Gingrich was one of their non-lobbyists. So they're probably going to get just what they want. However, if they didn't, it would cut $1 trillion, $100 million a year on average over a decade out of our deficit. All going to doctors and hospitals who won't treat Medicare patients unless they get more money. And of course, now they're used to the more money. They're used to the higher level. Now, let's say there was actual competition. Let's say that there was a market that would bear. Of course, there's not. If you have to go and get treated for cancer and you don't get your chemotherapy, you're going to die. If you can afford it, you're going to pay. The thing is that without Medicare, very few people are going to afford it. A lot of people will die, or doctors and hospitals will have to take a cut. That's what would happen in real life. That's what happens to other businesses, but not in the medical industry because they have a big lobby. So there's another $1 trillion. Now, if you add everything together, then of course there's the payroll tax cut. That's $100 billion every single year. And they're talking about extending it for 2 more years. So that's another $200 billion. Now, if you add the whole thing up, and Congress did nothing but pass a continuing resolution, CRA authority, continuing resolution authority to keep spending at the same level as last year and let the tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, go by the wayside. Let the increases for the doctors and hospitals expire, so they'll just have to take a cut like everybody else has during this recession. There would be one bad thing, and that would be the unemployment extension would go out, and I would be against that, but that would be part of it. Over 10 years, a cut of $7.2 trillion over 10 years, over a decade. That's a lot more than the 1.2 for the other, that they're trying to figure out how to do without raising taxes for the wealthy and all this other stuff. Most of it's tax increases, but the majority of the tax increases are in 3 areas. You'll have to pay a little more, but your wealthy friend who makes $1 million a year, will have to pay an extra $100,000 in taxes. Well, I feel sorry for him, but he's helping to keep his country strong and to keep everybody else safe. There won't be any need to reform Medicare. It'll be solvent. There won't be any need to reform Social Security. It'll remain solvent. And we would be collecting taxes equivalent to what we spend, not now, but what we expect to spend in a few years. Why is that? Because unemployment will eventually go down. Recession will eventually be over, although Republicans say high taxes cause unemployment, which it didn't do during the Clinton administration. So we have a situation where actually one estimate is that if Congress did nothing, the budget would balance itself by 2016 and actually go into surplus for a couple of years. A very tiny surplus, but a surplus nonetheless, with Medicare, Medicaid at present levels, well, actually slightly reduced levels because now they've been increased. So it would be at those levels, and Social Security at the level that it already is. The only thing that could throw that out would be interest, if the interest rates go up. And then that would go away. A lot of our spending right now is due to the recession. We have COBRA, which means somebody is thrown into unemployment. They can continue to get government subsidized health insurance at a higher rate that they were paying because they have to pay the company side, but at least they're insured. Unemployment, increased medical costs because of stress, and all the other horrible things that come from being unemployed, food stamps, and all the other things, but mostly assistance to city, states, governments, which we've had to do. That should go away by itself, and spending should go back to from well over 25 down to 22 or 23% of GDP, while receipts will go up to 22% of GDP. So that would be close to a balanced budget. Now, I have another thing that says no matter what, things will go to still an extra 1% of GDP off. That they need to cut an extra 1% of GDP to do it. So at that one, right now, in 2011, we're at 8.5% of GDP is just the deficit. Would go down to 1% if Congress did nothing. And it would be a little more than that if Congress extends the unemployment, which I think they ought to do. But as far as I'm concerned, we would be much closer to having a balanced budget and having a balanced budget sooner if we just let the Bush tax cut retire. Of course, the Republicans say that's going to destroy our country. And of course, it didn't under Clinton. My name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a retired federal worker. Thanks.